podcast. We have Matt on. Matt is not just a pro, or probably uh, the best and most knowledgeable individual you'll have on a podcast in rum. He's actually in the Cognac region of France, which pretty much says "Ask me anything," because this is a journey that started from what I'm picking up in New Orleans, which again is a rum in the U.S., maybe even the rum capital of the U.S. They got some unique infrastructure over there distilling, and a journey to cognac. So we'll let Matt have the floor, let him introduce himself. At times, my camera might just go off, so it's just him in the software, because he seems like he has an awful lot to share. Let's go.
Cool. Well, thank you for having me on, first of all. My sort of journey started into all of this, what I'm doing, first a blogger, then a book author, now a book publisher, among other things, consultant. My journey sort of started back when I was still working in technology. I worked for a number of high profile or very well known within the industry software companies, including Microsoft. I was there 2004 to 2011. And it was actually at Microsoft where I came across some people, some friends of mine who were like making, what we today would call craft cocktails, chilled glasses in the freezer and good ingredients and, the good ice and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, okay, this is cool. I can do this. I really enjoy doing this. And at some point I'm like, hey, I like these tropical cocktails, these tiki drinks, things like that. And I need to start buying, rums. I need something better, not just Bacardi. I need something else in there. And I started, sort of digging, basically sort of going down the rabbit hole. And I had previously, in a previous life, when I was doing tech, earlier, 20 years earlier, I had written books where I tore apart Microsoft Windows and said, how does it actually work? Tell me how it works. Don't depend on the documentation. Tell me how it works. So that perspective of like, don't trust anybody, don't trust anything until you see it with your own eyes. I applied to sort of my, as I was coming into cocktails and spirits, I was like, there's no good information out there, and half of what's out there I don't trust. So go find it out yourself. So I started, at some point I started, my rum collection, grew to 10 bottles, and then it was 50, and then it was 100, and it's grown since then. But it was, at some point I was like, I should be writing, I should be sharing this stuff. Like if I'm curious about these things, and if people are confused about these things, or if there's a whole lot of bullshit out there, like if I figure this stuff out, why don't I share this with other people? And so that started the blog, Cocktail Monk blog, in 2013. That was actually when we were still living in Seattle. In 2018, my wife Carrie and I, we both quit our jobs in the same day. We were in different fields, both quit our jobs in the same day so that we could pursue our dreams. And for me, that was to try to somehow make money in writing about spirits through books primarily. And for her, it was to research or to basically get a master's in preservation architecture, the architecture of preserving old buildings. And there's no place like New Orleans better than that kind of stuff. So off we went to New Orleans, and the last thing we did in Seattle before driving to New Orleans was to send off our first book to the printer, and that first book was Minimalist Tiki, which is a tiki cocktail book. But it was in the sort of the real reason for doing the tiki cocktail book first was to prove to ourselves that we could do all of the publishing ourselves, that we didn't need to go work with a traditional publisher and let them make all the money. So it was a beta test for what would later become our gigantic rum book. You're muted. I can't. You're muted.
Yeah, I'm mute. For all those out there listening, rum happens to be the spirit that is the wild, wild west. The regulations over there, we'll let Matt explain it to you why he like literally entered the field that is wide open for a team of FBI and CIA agents, from the island regulations and whatnot. So Matt, tell us what you saw with the labelings not matching up and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the, like your, TTB Math, your company, and of course, that was pretty early on that I found one of the earlier rum distillers that I'd met was telling me about. Well, just go look at the label. Like, what do you mean look at the label? Where? Like, oh, it's on the website. He showed me the TTB website, and it was like, the COLA database, and I'm like, okay, this is a whole new level of information I didn't have before. And I ran with that for a while. I would basically go find all the new rums, and I would publish like the new interesting new interesting new rum releases around that. But to your earlier point, you mentioned like rum is the Wild West, and I know people like to say that, and I have to sort of a way of disabusing of that notion. So I have a question for you. So you look at like, well, rum, like Scotch whiskey. Scotch whiskey has rules, and rum doesn't.
No.
So my question for you is like, if I ask you, is Scotch whiskey a distilled spirit?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. If I ask you, is rum a distilled spirit? What would you say?
Yes. Except
I would
it's
say no.
crass.
No, it is a category of distilled spirits. The perception problem people have with rum is that they treat it like one thing. They say, like, think about rum versus bourbon or rum versus Scotch whiskey. And the reality is, when you say rum has no rules, I will say, well, whiskey has no rules. They go, yes, it does. Whiskey has rules. Scotch whiskey has its rules, and bourbon has its rules, and Irish whiskey has its rules, and Canadian whiskey has its rules. And I go, guess what? Jamaican rum has its rules, its own geographical indications. Guatemala has its rules. Guyana has its rules. So when we think about rum, we're like saying like the category of rum has no rules. Like, well, the category of whiskey has no rules. The category of brandy has no rules.
So, Matt, that's brilliant.
Thank you. I've honed this for a while now, and so and to a certain degree, this is a problem of sort of economic disparity, if you will, in that a country like America, they're big. They have a big, the big Kentucky Bourbon Association, the American Bourbon Distiller. They're a big thing. They have a big lobby. They can create their rules. They can promote their rules. They can get the world to understand that bourbon is a distinctly American product. And the same thing happens in Scotland. The Scotch whiskey group, that consortium, they would ship Scotch whiskey around the world. They make Scotch whiskey. They created a geographical indication for Scotch whiskey, and it became known around the world that these are the rules for Scotch whiskey. And if you don't do this, you can't call it Scotch whiskey. And the same holds true for cognac. Cognac has its rules. If you don't follow these very exacting rules, you don't get to call it cognac. And the end of the day, all that is the producer group in whatever country you're in, and the government basically saying these are now a national law, that the bourbon rules are essentially a national law codified as a standard of identity. Same in Scotland, that the Scotch whiskey GI is codified as a geographical indication. And that's all that really is those are when we talk about the rules, that's what we're talking about. And again, you go to rum, it's like, well, Jamaica has those same rules. Jamaica has its rules, and you can't call it Jamaica rum without following these rules. You can't call it Martinique AOC rum agricole if it doesn't follow these rules. The problem is that you're not aware of those rules, that Scotland and America and France have done a fantastic job, and are big enough to get people in other countries and around the world to understand these rules and these regulations, that they exist. But Jamaica is only 60 years old as a country. We sort of we just think of it as like the Caribbean. It's like it's those Caribbean countries. It's like, no, they're each distinct country. that France is a distinct country, and actually Martinique is part of France. And the Martinique AOC regulations are probably more complex, more constrained than supposedly the cognac, very explicit, strict cognac regulations. And so it's a matter of education for the most part. Rum was never considered a premium spirit, so nobody bothered to learn these rules. And it is now basically unintentionally enforced by the buying system, if you will. You go walk into a retailer. If I walk in Total Wine, I can go like, where's the bourbon aisle? And I go there. There's the bourbon aisle, and I will see just bourbons. Next to it, I'll see just rye. Okay, cool. Separate aisle, or further down the aisle, I'll see all the Scotch whiskeys together, and I'll see it all. Maybe the Irish whiskeys have their own section, but I'm not going to see a bottle of Fireball in the middle of the bourbon section. Like people are like, no, that's not a bourbon. Like that belongs over in the flavored whiskeys. But you go to the rum aisle at a Total Wine or most liquor stores, and it's like you got the Malibu and the Bumbu and things like that, things that are not even legally rum, all mixed in together, and not even bothered to be sorted by country. So yeah, of course, people think, well, it's just rum and there's no rules, because when I look at the shelves, it's just a mishmash. The retailers don't care enough to actually do this. And like, is it hard? Yes. Is it like, do you have to know that there are actually at least 10 countries geographical indications? And you're like, oh man, I got to learn all those on top of knowing about Scotch and bourbon and Irish. You're like, what do you mean? Like, yeah, it's hard. So they're gonna forget it. And they just sort of throw it all together as rum, and that's why we think that rum has no rules, because we don't respect the rules we have. And in fact, if speaking of TTB and standard of identity, there's a standard of identity for bourbon. There's a standard of identity for rye. The standard of identity for Scotch whiskey essentially says Scotch whiskey is made in Scotland, follows the rules of Scotland, whatever they define those rules to be. The standard of identity for cognac is made in France and follows the rules that France has set out for it. And the U.S. absolutely could do that with rum. They could say that there's a standard of identity for Demerara rum. Europe recognizes Demerara rum, but the U.S. could say there's a standard of identity for Demerara rum. It's made in Guyana and follows the rules of Guyana here, but they don't. There's no standard of identity for any rum. We just don't care. The TTB doesn't care. The only time that they did care was there was a standard of identity for cachaça. Cachaça is a cane spirit made in Brazil. And why did they do this? Well, the U.S. wanted Brazil to recognize bourbon as a distinctly American product. And so the U.S., this is actually in the documents, the U.S. says, okay, fine. If you recognize bourbon, we'll recognize cachaça as a distinct standard of identity. So to that point, there are plenty of rules. You just don't know about them. And the system is basically rigged against respecting the rules.
So interesting. So I do believe there's another identity in the U.S. that's recognized. It's called Cuban rum. Because of a lawsuit between, what's that story? You'll know the details better.
Yeah. I have written extensively about this. Essentially, it's as is often the case, there's a thing where somebody forgets to file a trademark or redo a trademark, and somebody else comes along. The basic details, as I remember them, are that at some point the Arecabala family had left Cuba circa 1960. They left the Cuban Revolution. They left Cuba and left the trademark unregistered circa 1973. And by this point, the U.S. embargo was already in effect. But nonetheless, the American government would happily, sort of like re-up their trademark. But the Arecabala family did not do that. Meanwhile, the Cuban government, in conjunction with Pernod Ricard, basically Cuban government, essentially go like, we're going to register that trademark. And so they go register a trademark, and it's fine. But then Bacardi comes along and says, well, we're Cuban, we're of Cuban heritage, and they basically go to the Arecabala family and go basically like sell us everything, sell us the rights to all this stuff. And then Bacardi makes the claim that this rum, this trademark, was illegally stolen, if you will. That basically, like, the Cuban government, is illegitimately took this family's product, that the trademark they registered was stolen from the Arecabala family. And I don't get into the who's right or who's not right in this. I just, my business is understanding what is the contention, what is the point of contention, not arbitrating that contention. But it's one of those things. It's been percolating along the courts for, I don't know, something like at least 30 years now. And like every couple of years we see another thing, and like little like victory for the actual Cuban side, and victory for the Bacardi side, and it was back and forth. And said I have no vested interest in the outcome. I just wish that rum made in Cuba could be consumed or could be brought into the U.S. legally. So
Wait, I got 2 bottles of the real Cuban rum. I
mm,
happen to have toured Cuba, so I went to the Cuban distillery, and I made a discovery.
mm.
I hope the feds don't come banging down the door that you can actually order Cuban rum from the United Kingdom, and they'll ship it to you.
That's my understanding is that may occur, but on theory, it's not supposed to happen. Yeah, I mean, I'm in France now, so it's not a big deal at all. But I had an extensive collection of Cuban rums while in the U.S. as well.
Yeah, so-
It's sort of the difference between are you bringing in a pallet versus like, did the Customs and Border Patrol, did they care? The reality at the end of the day is like if one person comes in with a bottle of Cuban rum or 2 bottles, it doesn't really matter economically. It's the like, is somebody legitimately bringing in and making a commercial profit on a large scale?
Yeah.
So, there's the law and then there's the law as it's enforced. So, and
Yes.
it's gone back and forth all the time. And, like I said, for a while, during the Obama administration, I was like, yeah, you go to Cuba, you can bring back, I think it was like $100 in rum or something like that. So that's how some of my collection came in. I did actually go to Cuba then.
Yeah, I was there with my whole family actually. We went to the museum, we toured the distillery. It was super cool, and I gotta say that they have that rum. I mean, Cuban is at least because of all this fighting for both sides, branding wise, was absolutely unbelievable. Because
Mhm.
Cuban rum took on this aura like a Cuban cigar
Right.
because of it. So
Yeah.
this marketing.
Yeah, I mean, within the rum geek community, Cuban rum is enjoyed by many, and I certainly enjoy it. I seek, I myself seek out some Cuban rums that are not technically legally might not be considered Cuban rum per the regulations, but they're beautiful. But within the geek community, there's plenty of other really interesting rums. So it's funny, like the people who are not the super geeks are like, I want the Cuban rum. The ones who are the geeks, well, A, they probably have some already, and B, they're like, I've got rum from 30 different countries here, so this is just one more
Yeah.
thing in my palate.
So tell us about some of these strange ones. I mean, I've browsed a little bit. I've seen like from Fiji Islands and all these, I don't know,
Yeah.
South America, South Africa. It's like from everywhere is making rum.
Right. Yeah, I mean, traditionally rum was always made someplace close to the equator, like where you could grow the sugarcane. The one sort of interesting historical exception to this was back in the colonial era. There was actually a lot of rum made in England, and it was able to be made in England because in the colonial Caribbean, the sugar was not fully processed the way we do it today. We don't process it all on site per se. In fact, many sugar mills, even today in Louisiana, they process the sugar to a raw state, and then they send the sugar off to an actual refinery to make it like the pure white table sugar. The point is that the Caribbean sugar industry was cutting the sugar, milling sugar, processing it into a very raw state, basically still sticky and covered with molasses, putting it in a barrel and shipping it to England. And it was in England where they would further refine it into white sugar. But in the act of refining it to white sugar, you now have this molasses. So basically, the rum that was being made in the UK was basically coming from molasses that sort of piggybacked on the sugar crystals that were sent to the UK.
So interesting. And then that's how the United Kingdom's famous, what's the name of it, boat drink came about. The sailor's shot or something.
Hmm.
They would have a shot of rum for every sailor for like 100 years.
I don't know
Um,
that. You'll have to dig this up and share me. Share with me. I mean, certainly, there was the Royal Navy, and its sailor.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Tell
Yeah.
tell everyone about that. That's by far the best military to be in until they stop that tradition.
Right. So what's funny is we associate that with the UK, and we're like, black dot sailors getting drunk and all this kind of stuff. And the reality is that pretty much any sort of seagoing nation, if you go back to the colonial era, the European powers, France, Portugal, Spain, UK, France, basically any country big enough to have a navy that can be sail a long distance to the Caribbean, South America, Southeast Asia, you're like, well, you need a navy, and you need a navy. You need to have sailors in the navy, and those sailors are prone to desert and or to basically leave. And so you want there's two things. One, giving them alcohol every day is sort of like is an easy way to keep them coming back, keep them from leaving. If you're like, I really like this rum, or I get drunk every day, I won't leave, type of thing. The other interesting thing is that a lot of alcohol was sent out because water itself would go bad. If you think about ships in the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, there were no stainless steel containers there. There were no plastic IBC totes. We didn't understand the ability to sanitization. You couldn't boil water in any quantity on ship, and so when they would provision ships to go out, they would certainly put water on, but that water would go bad. In a wooden cask, water is going to go bad in 10 days or whatever the period is. And so they would also send out typically wine or beer or wine and other distilled spirits, eventually distilled spirits. If you think about it, water goes bad after 10 days. Well, beer is slightly alcoholic. It'll last a little longer. Wine's even more alcoholic. It'll last even longer before it goes bad. And eventually, but a distilled spirit, something at say 60, 70% ABV, a distilled spirit will stay good indefinitely. So, essentially all of the sort of European navies were issuing alcoholic beverages to their sailors for many years. It just so happened that the British became the most famous for it. That they, around 1800, a little after 1800, they sort of stopped messing around with beer and wine and stuff like that, and went to rum. Like, rum is our thing, and sort of continued that tradition well into the 20th century. They didn't actually stop issuing rum to sailors until 1970. Interestingly, I think it's New Zealand held on to the daily rum ration until 1992.
No, and they're an island nation.
Yeah, yeah. It was a long tradition. The powers that be in the Navy were certainly trying to get to sort of eliminate the rum ration, but it was like so much tradition that you could try, but you ain't gonna get anywhere. And basically, it took 100 years to get to that point where they're like, we can now do this, and people aren't gonna squawk too much.
It is like crazy,
Yeah.
in my view, because you would think like with modern technology, supposedly the reason given was because with modern technology, you can't go ahead and like fire properly and the like, which is weird if you ask me,
Yeah.
because it should go.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the quote was, "We are like that was given in 1969 or whatever when they declared that the last COT would be ended. It was like, we are a modern navy, we are nuclear power, all these things. So we can't have drunk people at the controls."
Except they had it throughout World War II, apparently, right? And World War One.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The Royal Navy, I'd say, over the course of the British Empire between 1800 and 1970, the Royal Navy was the single biggest customer of their colonies, from Jamaica, Guyana, Barbados. Yeah, they were like I have the records of how much rum was coming into the UK for almost every year in that period. I know how much, in most cases, how much went to the Navy every year, and that was its single biggest customer. And in some ways, you could argue that, given the challenges that the Caribbean sugar industry had in the late 1800s that if it weren't for the Royal Navy buying all that rum, they might have gone under. Basically, they're like, give
So
up on
that
sugar, give up on sugar, we'll go plant bananas or something.
so that's what I was wondering. It's kind of like the cycle,
Mhm.
that they were buying all the rum, which kept them in business. If they
Mhm.
went to, which kept them a colony,
Mhm.
which kept them in control, which kept them in business.
Right.
It's like a circle.
Right. Yeah, the whole, is somebody who researches rum, like there's no escaping the colonialism and the patterns of colonialism and the economics of it. And, it's actually, it's a little unfortunate if you think about it that some essentially, the British government now seems to acknowledge this, but they did not really give up on the colonial aspect of things until it was like, we're losing money on this. It's like easier to just let them go. And we see, and this was basically after World War II. The British economy was sort of decimated by World War II, and you got all these colonies, and they're like having their own problems. And at some point, the British are like, it's going to give up. Like go be your own country if you'd like. You want freedom, good. Go be your own country.
Move
So
right in.
yeah, and so 62, 60, Barbados, Jamaica, Trinidad, Guyana, St. Lucia, St. Kitts, Grenada, basically over a 30-year period, pretty much the entire Caribbean peeled off into the entire British Caribbean basically peeled off into independent countries. Now, when you do that, that sounds nice, except like you're now a new country and you don't have the financial backing. You no longer have the financial backing of Great Britain. You're like need to establish yourself in world markets, and it's basically these countries were very conceptually very poor relative to other countries, which is again one reason why people don't know the Rum House rules. So, like, they're not a powerhouse. Jamaica and Guyana are not a powerhouse relative to the UK or Scotland or UK or US or France, for example. So we don't care as much about their rules. I do, but conceptually we don't care as much.
The economics that you're discussing here is fascinating, because if you look, and I'm just drawing a parallel here, I have, the encyclopedias and stuff from the 70s, and you'll see that tequila, in like 1970 encyclopedias, they got like a half a page mention, like an afterthought.
Mhm.
But if you look at the rise of Mexico, the success of Mexico, the country building up economically, um, so went the tequila with it and becoming a premium spirit.
Mhm.
If I can say, just learning from what you said now, it seems like there is a parallel.
Mhm.
You know, with growth comes marketing, which comes branding, which comes recognition of category, which comes demand. Am I
Right.
wrong with seeing that?
Yeah, this is where we've seen like the rum world now, the rum producing countries, now see a parable. Like, we have that, like Mexico, is now a fairly substantial economy, but basically came from a sort of a economically lesser status, and its native spirit tequila has been able to premiumize. And I certainly think a large amount of that is due to buyers in the U.S. Buyers in the U.S. who are like, purchase it. Mexico's easily accessible. It had a path. Tequila was something different than bourbon, and it's funny, we're seeing, like, within the rum world, we're trying to grow the category because the more demand, the more good stuff we get in, the more it is available to us. So you can look at like Mexico and what's happened with tequila and mezcal as artisanal spirits. Like, you know, I love it. I love tequila. I love the agave. I love what they're doing. But for every tequila person who's like, oh my God, it's so amazing, and the Hona stones and the milling and the roasting and artisanal and small. I'm like, for every one of those stories, you're like, hey, we got like 5 or 10 times that in the Caribbean. You just
No
haven't gone
question
down. You
about
haven't
it.
gone to go see the Clarion makers in Haiti, for example. Like, we have the same stories. You just know, tequila's a little easier to get tequila in the U.S. than it is to get some of the things in the smaller Caribbean countries. So it's an economic and opportunity problem.
1,000%. I mean, I saw this firsthand. I didn't appreciate rum till I was in I was in Cuba. It's actually a very interesting story. Uh, the Cubans were having an issue with their kosher certification on
Mhm.
the rum. And so they, I guess, someone figured out that I'm a rabbi that distills. So they convinced me to come there on vacation because you can't do business in Cuba.
Mhm.
I wasn't going to turn it down. There was an Orthodox kosher hotel there. And they said, yeah, come look on the house. So they came. I got a visa different than my kids because I was
Mhm.
going to meet with them. Again, not for business, I guess, rabbinical advice. I don't know, however they bill it. And they told me, look, we were kosher certified for 50 years. And kosher certification, you have to understand the process. And like, I'm understanding the process. I looked into it. I'm like, I went to their museum, which also explains a lot of things. And I was like shocked. I thought in my mind, I'm making bourbon fine. I always looked at rum as like that cheap sugar you poured in and fermented. And it was like, whoa, this is new, an eye opener. So I was chatting with him. I asked him what happened, and they told me, it's a huge market, kosher certification. Rum's easy to get kosher certified. That much I already learned. I'm like, I don't know why you would be losing your kosher certification. It doesn't make sense. All it is sugar cane,
Mhm.
yeast, water, and some more sugar cane, some more yeast. I mean, there's nothing in it. It comes out that there was a miscommunication because they couldn't get English speaking rabbis to come in for certification because that would be from the US. So they
Mhm.
had an Israeli certification, and that makes sense also because the rum is being sold in Israel,
Right.
right?
Right.
And it's good for Passover. It's a good market. But
Right.
he only, the coach certified from Israel only spoke Hebrew. Their Spanish representative in Cuba only spoke Spanish.
Mhm.
And it just, they probably met somewhere in English, and this one went like this, and this one went like that. Uh, so I just
There you
CC'd
go.
them in the email. I said, guys, look, and it was actually comical
Right.
because the kosher certifier said to me in the email, he says, this shouldn't never happen. I mean, this is a massive company operation. What in the world is going on? I said, don't ask me. I'm enjoying my vacation.
Right.
You gotta figure it out. I'm happy to be the translator, make sure your language goes through. So that was cleared up. But at that point, it was like this. And also, I always heard about Cuban rum, and
Right.
so I was there and I got all into it. And it just blew my mind that this is a category that needs to be explored, expanded, talked about, because rum is really an historic spirit. And it's just like, I don't know, maybe it's prohibition that killed it.
Yeah.
You'll know. Tell me.
Yeah. I would say that we oftentimes fixate on rum where it's from as a style. We think about geography as a style, uh, and we do this with whiskey. We think, well, Scotch whiskey comes from Scotland, Irish whiskey comes from Ireland, and we attribute those flavor characteristics. We know what Scotch whiskey tastes like. We know what bourbon tastes like. We know bourbon is American. So we use geography to differentiate these styles. But the reality is that you can make something in America that tastes very much like a Scotch whiskey. You make American
Mm.
single malt, and it will taste fairly close to a Scotch whiskey. And it's the fallacy of like geography matters. Yes, there is terroir, and there are things about where it's made which can influence its flavor. But fundamentally, what matters the most is how did you make it? What was your source material? How did you ferment it? How did you age it? And in rum, I've started thinking about this in terms of the styles as basically different traditions. The tradition of a light white spirit that has a particular set of techniques and steps to make it. That's very different from a rum agricole, from a cane juice rum. That's a different
Okay.
set of steps and tradition. Very different from a super wildly funky Jamaican rum. That is an entirely different tradition that, among other things, involves intentionally letting bacteria grow in your fermentation. They're not trying to keep it out. They're trying to like make it more bacterial fermentation. That's a tradition. And yes, it's associated with Jamaica, but you can do the same thing in Barbados. There actually is a rum from Barbados made in a similar way. So it's tradition is the most important factor, not where it's from per se. So
So break down these three different types of rums. The standard rum that you buy, that's called the most commercialized. Then rum agricole, which is, to my understanding, very Frenchy. And then, like you said, the Jamaican one that has this, what they say, the smell of bananas.
Right, right. So essentially, I mean, there's actually several more styles beyond that, but those are the ones I would focus on, or easily focus on here. The sort of, I would say, the standard, if you will, sort of middle of the road rum style. That's pretty straightforward. That is, you take molasses, you dilute molasses, you add a Saccharomyces cerevisiae yeast to it, you let it ferment for 2, 3, 4 days. You distill it in a pot or a column still, say 80-85% ABV, and you then basically put it in a cask. You age it for a few years, dilute it down. That's sort of a very straightforward middle of the road style. That's your Bacardi, that's your Mount Gay, that's things like that. And there's things, slight differences there, but that's very different, for example, from an agricole style rum. A cane juice rum starts from cane juice. It has to be made from cane juice, and cane juice gives a very different flavor profile than molasses. It's, you could say they're both sugar, but if you taste a cane juice rum, it's the closest thing I could describe to you as an unaged tequila. That's sort of like would you taste an unaged tequila, you feel like I'm tasting the agave here.
I'm a huge fan of rum agricole just because, and the same thing I always say for less so on grain, because grain spirit, you don't really get the Torrier in there.
Right.
But if we're looking, most of my experience when I drink, and I find for most people drinking, they don't even realize that, is that you want to feel a connection. You want to feel a part of the story. You want to understand and discuss. This is something I've learned from the French. Fellow Americans, please don't be insulted. There's a culture of drinking in the U.S., of just going ahead, taking a huge swig, the $11.75 bottle of vodka, it's 1.75 liters, and just going and guzzling. But if you really want to, and this understand what you're drinking and appreciate, and you want to connect with the heritage, as you would say, the tradition, there's a heart that's in the bottle, and that's very much felt in unaged rum agricole, an unaged tequila. I would not say an unaged bourbon.
That's another fantastic example nobody thinks about. A Peruvian pisco cannot be aged. When you drink Peruvian pisco, that is you can taste the grape. You can tell exactly this
There
is
you
me.
go.
And you can tell the grapes apart. It's like that intense.
There you go. So this is what is the beauty of unaged products. Everyone's always jumping, and this is also, Matt will fill you in, hysterical about rum. Everyone's always looking for the darkest bottle, but sometimes the darkest bottle will be there because he used a high char barrel, taking out all the nuances and the flavors. Sometimes it's just some countries let you add in lots of caramel and whatnot, so you get that. But an unaged one, it gives you the ability to actually feel the artist, see if there's nuances, notes that are off, flavors that are off. I'll be honest, myself, when I started distilling, the reason why I went to distilling over beer making is if you make a beer and notes are off, everyone knows you gotta dump the batch. But if you're a distiller and you're making a whiskey that you're gonna age, there is no issue if it's slightly off, because guess what? You gotta go into a barrel. It's gonna age for 3 years. If it's not good, it will be aging for 5 years. At a certain point, it will be worth value because people will pay for age statements no matter how ridiculous it is. And so that's a difference that you don't get.
Right. The way I think of it is that the more steps you have to make a product, the farther away you get from the source material. The Basically, the opening paragraph of our Modern Caribbean Rum book is essentially
What's the name of it? Share it with everyone.
it's called Modern Caribbean Rum,
Modern Caribbean.
150-page book.
I need a link of this because we're gonna promote this. This is
Yeah,
awesome.
I will get you that link.
Yeah.
But it's essentially like, what is rum? It's a distilled spirit. Well, then what the hell is a distilled spirit? I was like, let's look at it. What the hell? What does spirit mean? Spirit, like spirit is like the essence of something. The same with what does distill? What does that mean? To distill the essence. So essentially, the word distilled spirit means basically like this is the purified, condensed version of what it came from. And so, in that regard, if you do the minimal processing to make a distilled spirit from grape, you should taste the grapes. And the same thing with an agave. Same thing with a barley or whatever you use. You should taste that. One little minor correction, something you said there is most dark rums are in fact, yes, they are in fact caramel. The color comes from caramel. What's surprising to many people is that the high char barrel doesn't actually make it darker. That char is actually a filter. Like when you create, it's a Brita filter. So the higher the char level, actually, the more of the Brita filter you put in there. You're basically filtering out a little more of these essences. And there's actually a company that's done this where they put rum in the same barrels, like 1, 2, 3, 4 char level, and looked at the color of them and go, it's there. Actually, you go from lowest to highest char levels. You actually, the spirit gets lighter in color.
Fascinating. So when you char a barrel, you're turning that I've seen. You're turning the char into a filter. You know, you got those charcoal filters.
Yeah,
It's removing all the flavoring.
Yeah, you made a Brita filter inside of your barrel.
So don't look for the highest char. Look for the finest char. Get yourself some good flavors.
Yeah, yeah.
Very interesting. So which countries do you find the most abstract, most unique? You know, one that if you're gonna go ahead and tell someone that says, "Look, Matt, I just want something so outlandish, so cool for a party, it's gonna make a statement."
Yeah. So in terms of the variety of rum, there are the interesting aspects of the rum. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, you know, the one that no one heard of but needs to be on everyone's table. I guess then price point would also be important. I'm putting you on the spot.
So, I would give you two answers. So for, let's say, the country that makes some of the most interesting rums that doesn't get the love and attention it deserves, except amongst the super geeks, would be St. Lucia. Like one distillery, but that distillery is incredibly diverse. They make all sorts of interesting rums, good prices, because they don't have the market awareness of some of the big Jamaican rums, for example. But St. Lucia, in terms of sort of interesting, some of the more I mean, there's some interesting places like Haiti where there's like less lovely Barbancourt, but there's also Clairin. Like for every agave distillery out there in Mexico, there's a distillery, equal or not more little tiny artisanal Clairin distilleries in Haiti, for example. So you're going to get a wide range of rums, and they're going to have a wide range of flavors. Some maybe not to everybody's palate, but it is sort of that very interesting aspect.
Guys,
But
Matt's saying take a trip. Matt says take a trip. You got to decide for yourself.
Take a trip. I mean, I think I've been 15 rum producing countries, and I'm annoyed that I haven't been to more.
So interesting. So how do you wind up in Cognac, France, if you're a rum lover?
So just sort of happened this way, actually. We had, my wife and I had been planning to move to Europe at some point. We were looking at several countries, and it came to a point where France has the best visa for us, so let's just do what we want to do. And then we have a lot of friends here. Many friends with Plantation, Plantaray, with other brands. So we probably have the best network of people in France. and then so it makes it sort of like the ideal place. If you're going to move to a foreign country and you don't speak the language natively, it's good to have people around you, a support network of people around you. So it was France that we moved to.
But why the Cognac region?
Because I said Cognac. Because among other things, there was a house available and it worked out. So it's funny. I actually live. There's a Cognac distillery about 50 feet from me.
Oh my! I would.
Not operating right now. Yeah.
If I would be living within that close to a Cognac distillery, I wouldn't be able to make it onto a podcast ever.
Yeah. Well, it hasn't operated in a little while, but it should hopefully be making some cognac in the next couple of months.
That is so cool. Is there anything else they distill, or they're just Cognac because hey, that's the highest ticket price over here for a Cognac region?
Yeah. No, I mean, I love cognac. I love the other Armagnac, for example. I love Calvados. This one of the interesting things about cool things about France is its spirit tradition, not just in cognac, but the other brandies. And it's funny. There's actually a massive whiskey making industry in France. There's more whiskey consumed in France than cognac. In fact, this is an interesting fact. Only 3% of the cognac made is consumed in France.
Wild.
Yeah, the U.S. and China are the two biggest export markets. I think the UK is probably somewhere way up there. But basically, very little was consumed in France. It was when it was conceived, it was essentially like the British coming down and making cognac brandy to ship back to the UK, if you will. So it's the U.S. and China have been the biggest markets, and that's why the whole tariffs, not only the U.S. but also China's tariffs regarding EU rules and stuff like that. Basically, the cognac industry has been hammered. The sales have been declining just because of sort of economic conditions outside of their control. But we see it like now. They're sort of like, they can't just let vines go fallow, so they basically have to rip them out. It's like, we're not going to use them, got to rip them out. So we drive around and I see cognac vineyards that are like, we have to pull the vines out type of thing.
I mean, that's heart-wrenching for the grower.
Yeah.
You spend all these years. Cognac, and I guess you'll tell me if I'm the same, is a very different animal than grains, than what whiskeys and bourbons, because you have to really, a grain you plant, you throw the seeds on the floor, you drive some trucks over that cut it. There's not much love given to a cornfield or to a wheat field. But
you know what is interesting? I think about it. Here's what I think about it. If we think about distilled spirits, what they are, I would argue that brandy and rum are the two most simple and most pure spirits, if you will, because fundamentally every spirit is made from sugar. And when I say that, many people go, "What are you talking about?" It is, because every spirit, their source material, no matter what you're making, that source material has to be converted into sugar. That's the malt, basically the cooking and the malting process, the cooking. You turn that starches and that barley and that corn into sugar. And we do with agave. You roast that agave. You turn those things into sugar. Whereas grape juice, you take a grape, you squeeze it, that juice is ready to ferment. You take a cane sugar juice, you squeeze it, that is ready to ferment. Everything else you make involves additional steps. And additional steps mean you get further away from the original source material.
Matt, that is absolutely brilliant. Especially from my understanding, is a lot of the grapes, you literally just put them in and they ferment on their own. You're doing nothing. So you're just putting them into the carboy, smashing them down, whatever, crushing them, stepping on them with your toes, if you will, and it's going to ferment. It's just going to go.
I can imagine that happening. I've not seen that happen myself, but yeah.
Try it
out. Yeah. Now here in Cognac, they have very sophisticated equipment that does all this, but somebody could go like plant a few grapes themselves and go try it.
Just try it and ferment, and then you do one time distilling. Sugar cane, you crush it, the juice comes out. It's probably the same process.
It will pretty much natural yeast in the air. If there's enough sugar in it, the natural yeast in the air will basically start fermenting.
Are we appealing to the underage now? Just saying the simple way to make alcoholic beverages.
Well, it's not a secret. You know, it's not a secret. Most underage people don't care enough to understand that.
Understand it, yeah. If they can understand it, then we don't have to worry about their drinking problems. But it's so interesting because I never. You are so insightful because it's so. Are you a righty? Because this is so methodically thought out. Each step. This is not like I'm all over, and you're like, well, this is tradition, and this is rum is just a category like whiskey. Just what I've learned is just so smooth and clean and concise from you.
Yeah, I mean, several people have actually said that if you want to call it a superpower, there's actually somebody told me once. Bill Gates says that everybody has a superpower. What is your superpower? I think my superpower is taking complex topics and basically internalizing them, understanding them, and then basically explaining them in a way that people can understand. And so that's, I did that when it came to writing about computer stuff, and I do this with spirits. And like now, I don't write about something until I understand it myself, or I'm happy I understand it, and then it's just a matter of explaining it clearly. And many times the same topics come out. Rum has no rules, and rum is sweet. It's like no, think it through, explain it, move on to the next thing.
Absolutely amazing. All right, Matt, I think we should wrap this up. My mind is absolutely blown from what I've learned today. I'm going to obviously have to read up some more. Maybe we'll touch base and get you back on.
Yeah.
Matt, please wrap it up. Tell everyone where to get your book, how to contact you. This was amazing.
Sure. We said my website is Rumwonk. It's RUMWONK, rumwonk.com. We also publish books, including the big giant rum books called Modern Caribbean Rum, Minimalist Tiki. We also have a tequila book written by Tomas Estes before he passed. Several more tiki books. We are growing, adding new books all the time, but that website is Wonk Press. So I've sort of embraced the Wonk. I used to be Cocktail Wonk. Now I'm Rum Wonk, and our books are Wonk Press. So wonkpress.com. We ship in the U.S. We ship worldwide. We have a U.S. warehouse, a U.K. warehouse. It's people like you and your listeners who love spirits have allowed us to do this as our passion, our career for almost a decade now.
Guys, thank you, Matt, for coming on. He is truly. You'll watch all the shows. You'll know he's truly the best of the best in the field. We loved having him. It was so educational. Thank you, Matt.
You're